Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's council meeting for Monday, the 26th of March 2018. If you can all stand, please, while we say the opening prayer and acknowledgement to country. Lord, we ask that you guide us in our decision-making, protect us in the community we serve from all that is evil, and strengthen our unity for the welfare of the city. Amen. Amen. I would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people as the traditional custodians of the land that we meet upon today, and pay my respects to the elders, both past, present and future, for they hold the memories, culture, tradition and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that contribute to our community. Thank you. This council meeting is being webcast and recorded. By speaking at the council meeting, you agree to being recorded and webcast. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at this council meeting that you are respectful to other people and use appropriate language. AlburyCity accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of this council meeting. An audio recording will be made for administrative purposes. Conflict of interest declarations received by the Chair and disclosure of political donations. I've received a conflict of interest declaration from Councillor Vanderven. It's in relation to CM 18.2 strategic land acquisition, confidential item, and the interest is pecuniary, significant, and the brief description is I own a property whose boundary is close to the subject site and the Secretary of the Lavington Sports and Bowling Club is an employer of my business. And the action is to leave the chamber. Thank you. Mr Zachnich.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This advice to the council meeting relates to disclosure of political donations and the requirements under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. The Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, Section 147, requires a person submitting planning applications or submissions regarding a planning application to disclose any reportable political donation and or gifts to any local councillor or employee of the council. Reportable political donations include those of or above $1,000. The disclosure statement forms are available on Council's website or from the Customer Service Centre, must be lodged in accordance with the Act. The forms are also available at the back of the chamber during meetings. In dealing with development applications, councillors need to take into account specific matters contained in the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. Accordingly, the provisions of Section 79C1 of that Act are set out in the Council Officer's report detailing issues to be considered. The Local Government Act 1993, Section 375A requires that a division be called whenever a motion for a planning decision is put at a meeting of the Council or a Council committee. Planning decision means a decision made in the exercise of a function of Council under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, including a decision relating to a development application, an environmental planning instrument, a development control plan, or a development contribution plan under that Act, but not including the making of an order under Division 2A, Part 6 of that Act. Matters appearing in the Planning Development Committee meeting minutes which require a planning decision to be made will be dealt with separately and immediately following the motion for the adoption of the Planning and Development Committee meeting minutes. In respect to these matters, motions for planning decision put before the Council will be considered a division and recorded in accordance with Section 375A of the Local Government Act. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Zachnich. Apologies, CM4, we have none. CM5 and Merrill Minute, we do not have any. CM6 action plans, CM6.1 to CM6.4. Thanks, councillors. Councillor Conn.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that the following action plans be received and noted. The actions complete for noting only actions in progress and the long-term issues more than 3 months.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Conn, did you wish to speak to that at all?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. There being no further questions or debate, I'm happy to put all those in favour. Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you. CM6, CM7, confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting held on Monday the 26th of February 2018 at 6 p.m. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that the minutes of the council meeting held on Monday, 26th of February 2018 at 6 p.m. be confirmed.
Thank you. Looking for a seconder. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Strasbury, did you wish to speak to that?
No, thank you.
Thank you. There being no question or debate, I'm happy to put that. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM8, reports from council committees. CM 8.1, report from the Engineering and Works Committee meeting held on Monday the 12th of March 2018 at 6 p.m. Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Happy to move that the recommendations included in the report from the Engineering and Works Committee meeting held on Monday 12 March 2018 be adopted.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervan, would you speak to those at all?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Happy to put that report. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you. CM 8.2, report from the Community and Cultural Committee meeting held on Monday the 19th of March 2018 at 6 p.m. Councillor Conn.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that the recommendations included in the report from the Community and Cultural Committee meeting held on Monday the 19th of March 2018 be adopted.
Thank you. Councillor Glycan.
Happy to second that.
Thank you. Councillor Conn, do you wish to speak to that?
Only very briefly to note that those recommendations include our staff working on a family and domestic violence workplace implementation plan, which I look forward to seeing from them.
Thank you. There being no further question or debate, I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM 8.3, report from the Finance and Administration Committee meeting held on Monday the 19th of March 2018. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the recommendations included in the report from the Finance and Administration Committee meeting held on Monday 19th March be adopted.
Thank you. Councillor Strasbury.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to second that.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. No further debate or questions. I'm happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Reports from Community Forum, CM9, nothing to report. Notices of rescissions and notices of motion. CM 10.1, notice of rescission, industrial and commercial development applications. Councillor Glycan.
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor, to move the recommendation that we, the undersigned, of which we were three names, hereby wish to Council to rescind the following motion passed by Council at the meeting on 26 February 2018. The motion was moved by Councillor Vandervan and seconded by Councillor Stutchbury. A, that all industrial and commercial development applications for AlburyCity come to full council for decision, and B, that development applications that seek to modify industrial and commercial premises with an estimated value of $50,000 or above also come to the full council for decision. Mr Mayor, I move that we rescind that motion.
And there's another bit on the next page, I believe.
Should that be successful, Mr Mayor, we would... okay. We are asking that the motion be that Council requests that a new standing report be presented to Council Planning and Development Committee providing an overview of development and construction activity in AlburyCity on a monthly basis.
Thank you, Councillor Glycan. Councillor Doxey.
More than happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Glycan, do you wish to open debate on that item?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. It has become apparent, or the motion from Council has been circulating through the community, and there are a number of community members who are somewhat surprised that Council has taken this action. And I believe that upon reflection, Council might consider that it was not entirely wise to move with the recommendation or the motion that we wish to rescind. I believe that the alternative of the Council receiving a monthly report to the Planning and Development Committee, providing information on the activities that the Council are dealing with regards to development, application and construction within our local government area is more appropriate. Council is already able to call for development applications to come to Council, to the full Council, and there are a number of trigger points, one of which is that if two councillors were to request that an application come to Council, then it will come to Council. But there are other trigger points by which developments come to Council. It's important to note that we as councillors need to deal with the policy the policy for development applications, not necessarily each individual application. We as a council decide, noting of course that there are requirements by state government bodies as well, but we on the whole determine the development policy for our city. And it is then a requirement that council staff apply those policies to the applications. So, Mr Chair, I do not believe that we need to see the level of applications coming to us that would have come should we remained, had we kept this motion, that all industrial and commercial development applications come to council. And I don't think it would serve us well to look at all applications for redevelopment of over $50,000 come to council either. So, Mr Mayor, I would suggest to councillors that we should consider strongly the opportunity to rescind this motion now and replace it with the alternative of being provided with more information on a regular basis, and that the information would be more encompassing and it would look at all development and construction activity in Albury on a monthly basis. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. Speaker 4, Councillor Conn.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I do speak for the rescission motion as one of the councillors who voted for the original motion a month ago, and that's for a number of reasons. At the time, I supported the original motion because I believe it had the right intentions. There's a number of people in the community who want to see greater transparency and accountability and oversight of development in the city, and I support those comments. But at the time, I didn't think that the original motion was targeted enough. In that time, I've had the opportunity to have conversations with other councillors, with the Director of Planning and Environment, and with members of the community, and I've drafted an alternative motion that we'll be looking at shortly as 10.2. So I'm supporting the rescission motion in the context of hopefully proposing an alternative shortly. With regards to the reporting process, I don't believe that it's specific enough. The concerns that have been raised by councillors with regards to transparency and oversight won't be resolved by leaving up to the staff to determine what developments are included in that overview or not. And CM 10.2 also deals with that by creating some specific requirements. In response to Councillor Glacken, look, councillors do determine policy, and that includes our policy of delegations to staff. We can choose under what circumstances staff make decisions for us and under what circumstances they don't. So it's absolutely appropriate for us to be making these sorts of decisions. But in the context of what's happened in the last few weeks, I'll be supporting this particular rescission motion. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Conn. Speaker 4, Councillor Doxey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I agree with the wording of both the previous speakers. I voted against the original motion based upon the fact, first off, that I was concerned that there'd had some discussion, some councillors believed that the DA approving system was too long, and this would actually make the duration of the reporting longer still. So therefore, it sends the wrong message to the investors, to those that want to develop in Albury. And I think it also sends inadvertently the wrong message to our own planning staff, that we councillors all of a sudden think that we have the ability to be able to approve DAs ourselves. But I looked around at the profiles of all my fellow councillors, and I just don't see anyone there that happens to be a certifier or a building manager of any description whatsoever. So I encourage my fellow councillors to support the rescission motion and vote accordingly for the community and for the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey. Councillor Cameron speaking against.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There's been a couple of startling comments made tonight already. The gist of it seems to be that we are unqualified to determine planning matters. Well, we routinely determine planning matters and very significant planning matters. And that happens at every council that I'm aware of in New South Wales. And if we as councillors, as elected councillors, are unqualified to approve planning matters, and perhaps the state government thinks we are, but given by the legislative changes they're foreshadowed in Sydney, where they're taking a lot of planning powers or most planning powers off councils. But outside of Sydney, if that be the case, it's too late because we've been approving development applications for years. For years. It is a nonsense to say that if someone is elected to council, unless they're a town planner or they have the relevant education and experience in that area, that they should not be making planning decisions. There's a role for the staff and there is a role for the elected councillors. The role for the staff is to provide good reports, which they do provide to us, and I'm almost always very happy with the standard of reporting that they do, to lay out the options available to us and the rationale behind their recommendation. But the role of the councillors is to make the decision and bear the responsibility for that decision. This talk that these proposed changes that are foreshadowed in Councillor Con's amendment are unacceptable because we're not in some way experts in planning is just a complete nonsense. We do routinely, and we're required to routinely, not just set policy, but to make the actual decisions and bear the responsibility for those decisions. That's how it's always been, that's how it should be, and God willing, that's how it will continue unless the current Liberal National Government continues their rollout of their foreshadowed legislation around Sydney, Newcastle and Wollongong. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. Speaker against, Councillor Vandervan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just briefly, as the mover of the original motion 4 weeks ago to today, I concur with Councillor Con that there might be too much of an overarching motion with that original motion, and I'm happy for the issue to be re-raised tonight via the rescission motion and the notice of motion that she's put in. But to suggest that the original motion wasn't well thought out, I disagree with totally, on the basis that I think that not only do we have a responsibility to look at all of the major developments in our city from the perspective of our community and what requirements we're going to need into the future for council infrastructure to support those developments. I think that that's the major job of our council. We also we have to budget for capital expenditure for roads, for footpaths, for drainage, for sewerage, and these developments impact on that budget process enormously. And for us to not have any input into a couple of the major developments in our city over the last 12 months sort of says that we're irrelevant, and I don't believe that that's the case, because we have a job to do to make sure that the infrastructure that we need for our city is we know what we're going to need and we can budget and plan for it. So that's the reason why this original motion was put up and got the support of the majority of councillors at the time. I'm happy for the process now to go through to rescind this original motion, and I flag support for Councillor Con's more specific targeted motion that will follow hopefully soon. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vandervan. Speaker 4, Councillor Thurley.
I'll be brief because most of it's been said. I believe although I voted at the time in favour of the motion, I believe it was not well targeted. It said all new industrial and commercial development. That's a huge overreach in my opinion. And secondly, development applications with an estimated value of $50,000 or above is far too low a target. So I'm certainly in favour of the rescission motion right now.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. There being no further speakers for or against, Councillor Glacken, did you wish to close debate?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillors, we are known, or we have previously been known around the state as the council that espouses red carpet and not red tape. And it would be very disappointing if we were to suddenly become red tape and no carpet at all. We need to be encouraging appropriate developments and not hindering developments within our community. And I note the comments raised by Councillor Vandervan about planning and the decisions that councillors need to be able to make. I think it would also be very sad if we had our planning powers taken away from us. Planning and the right to make those decisions is really a privilege that is shared by most councils across this state, but not all. And there have been councils, for various reasons, that have had those privileges taken away from them. We don't want to put at risk our privilege, our right to make those planning decisions that we currently have, and that is that we can ask that applications come to us as a council for us to make those decisions, for those applications that we need to have to come to us to make those decisions. But we also don't want to be slowing down the development of our community, that appropriately managed and controlled development that we have hitherto been able to say has been very positive within our community. Albury has grown and developed in a very balanced and managed way. We don't want to lose that opportunity. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you, Councillor Gluck, and I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. And CM 10.2, notice of motion, delegations of authority, development applications. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A amend the delegations of authority from the General Manager to Staff Part 2, Item 83B as follows: to determine development applications, including applications made pursuant to Section 96 and Section 96AA of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979 and subdivision applications as A above, except in the following circumstances. Number one, the application has an estimated cost of development greater than $500,000 exclusive of applications for single residential dwellings. Or two, the application involves a proposal for subdivision of 10 or more lots. Or three, the application is the subject of more than 5 objections. B, be provided with a monthly report from staff listing lodged, determined and in-progress development applications, including their type, description, address, value and details of any requested variation from the development control plan that meet any of the following criteria. 1, any application with a total value greater than $100,000. 2, any application requesting variation from the development control plan of greater than 5%. 3, subdivisions creating 4 lots or greater. 4, any objections received that have not been able to be resolved through redesign or mediation. And 5, any other significant developments in the opinion of the Planning Department.
Thank you, Councillor Con. Looking for a seconder. Councillor Vandervan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Happy to second that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Con, did you wish to open debate?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, following on from the previous discussion, this, I hope, is the better targeted response that addresses the concerns that the councillors had last month. I've been working on this motion in consultation with several other councillors, and I've also incorporated feedback from our planning staff. The original version of this motion asked for greater than 2 objections rather than 5. It didn't have the provision for exclusion of single dwellings. I'm just giving these examples to demonstrate that I've already taken on feedback in drafting this report, and that I think it's now hit the mark for what we're actually looking for. In response to people arguing about, what type of development we'll have or whether it'll be faster and slower, this motion doesn't affect whether applications will be approved or not. It just means that we, as representatives of the community that we all live and work in, have greater oversight over the process. It's absolutely within our power to do that, according to the state government, and I think it's what the community deserves. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Con. Speaker against, Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In many respects, I support the aim of this motion. The major concern I have is that while Councillor Con has said quite clearly that she's taken feedback, and I did have some discussions with her about this, and I believe the motion is far better targeted than the previous one. What I think we really need to do is when council amends a major policy, it's required to go on public display for 30 days so that people can have some comment. And on this occasion, we have received submissions from members of the public, professionals in the planning area. And while they've raised some objections, I think the main objection that I can hear is we would like to have some comment on this first and provide a submission to council and to councillors so that you can take our views into account in this policy. And that's my position at the moment, that I would like, if this were to proceed, I would rather that it be laid on the table for a period of 30 days so that we can receive submissions from the general public and the professionals who are involved in planning in our community. I've certainly had some robust discussions in this chamber about planning matters, and I think that's appropriate that councillors should be determining planning decisions on behalf of the community. I would just like to see this move treated more like the way council would do with a new policy, that is, put it on public display and receive submissions and then proceed with the motion based on any submissions received. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. I have a question before a speaker against. Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to the most appropriate member of staff, is there a legislative requirement when dealing with matters of delegation to put it on a public consultation program, and has it been the practice to do that in the past?
Mr Zachnich.
Thanks for the question, through you, Mr Mayor. No, there is no legislative requirement in terms of community consultation around delegations. And secondly, no, that hasn't been the practice in the past. Thank you.
Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Speaker against, Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Yes, I speak against this motion and foreshadow that should this be lost, I would like to put forward an alternative motion, that being that the topic of delegations for planning applications be put out, or words to the effect of, be put out for community feedback, so there'd be some process around that, and then it later come to a workshop for further discussion. Mr Chair, I wish to speak against this because I don't think that we have a bad planning record in Albury. I don't think we have had what I would believe to be any clangers in Albury. And I am mindful of the fact that everybody's appreciation of good planning varies. And it varies because we are all the owners of our own castle, and our castle is our pride and joy. And none of us like to see someone build a castle that overshadows our castle in their property. All people who own their own land have a view as to what their neighbours should or shouldn't be doing. That's reality, that's human nature. And I am very mindful that the planning decisions that we make at council, the policy that we provide, is there to provide a consistent approach to development applications within our community. And I'm also very mindful that AlburyCity has a very good track record and has actually been lauded on a number of occasions, including with the Blewett Award, for the work that our city does in many areas, including one of which is planning, and that our planning staff have assisted a number of councils in our region over a number of years with planning in the bigger picture, as well as assisting with planning applications. So I do not believe that we necessarily have a model that needs to be fixed. I don't see any issues with our current model. However, as I've indicated in the motion that I have foreshadowed that I would be happy to move should this be lost, I'm very happy for us to consult with our community so that our community can tell us, do they really think that we have problems or issues with our planning department, with our planning model, and indeed our overall policy. I'd be very happy to hear that. Obviously, planning with with Albury City Council, as with any council across the state, needs to be reviewed, and we do have a review program for that. This would be in addition to that, but again, I'm happy for that to be considered. However, I cannot support this motion because there is no evidence that I have been given by anyone that we need to modify the planning that we have currently in Albury City. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. And I have another speaker against, Councillor Doxey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Like other councillors over the last couple of days, I've also had privy to some of the submissions that have been put forward. But they're not only submissions, they come from a very, very qualified element of the community, the planning element of the community, and they make some strong points. And I totally support exactly what Councillor Thurley said originally, that this is a very important motion, and I think we need to get this one right. And I'd like to see it go out to community consultation to gain a broad understanding of what the community, who we represent, actually want. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey. I have a speaker for, but I also have a question from Councillor Stutchbury. Councillor Stutchbury?
Yeah, Mr Mayor, I do have a question through you to the most relevant member of staff. Just to get an idea of, should this motion be successful, what sort of volume of work we might be looking at, or what number of DAs might be affected by this should it come into being. How many DAs might this affect should it come into effect?
Thank you. Mr Keys.
Through you, Mr Mayor, potentially on current figures that are with us at the moment, and this financial year there could be up to between 75 and 100 development applications being referred to Council for decision.
Did you have a follow-up, Councillor Stutchbury?
No, that's good, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr Mayor, on that.
Councillor Vanderman, you have a question?
So which category, items 1, 2 and 3 in this motion, do those 75 to 100 fall into?
Mr Keys.
So at the present time, sorry, through you, Mr Mayor, at the present time we've currently got 52 applications that fall into the category that includes both applications greater than 500,000. That's approximately 38, I believe. I'm just guessing on this list here. And there's about 14 development applications for subdivisions of greater than 10 or more lots. That's on those that have been determined. And there's another 13 currently. So I've got another 4 development applications for subdivisions involving 10 or more lots currently pending decision, and another 9 development applications currently in our system. That's at the start of March. We've still got another 3 months remaining in the year. If you look at that list, there's 65, and you could have another 20 to 30 applications come in the next 3 months.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. To the appropriate member of staff, these 75 to possibly 100 DAs that we're likely to be inundated with as councillors with the implementation of this particular motion, I can envisage that each of these DAs will individually need a detailed report for us to consider. Would that be the answer to the way it would be interpreted? Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey. Mr Keys.
Through you, Mr Mayor, any application that would be referred to Council for determination would involve a detailed and concise report covering off all of the issues that are necessary to ensure that Council is provided with adequate information to enable them to make their appropriate decision.
Councillor Doxey, you have a follow-up?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. It's my understanding that the planning staff are currently under a fair bit of pressure to keep up the current level of DAs. I'm just really concerned, Mr Mayor, that this will put a larger impact on the planning staff. If they're going to write a report for every DA that comes to us for consideration, where a town planner or other suitable...
Question, Councillor Doxey?
There will be a question at the end of my rambling, if I may, Mr Mayor.
Well, the rambling is almost as...
Right, question to Mr Keys, if I may, please, Mr Mayor.
Yes?
My concern is that purely we are not town planners. I am not a town planner. I just need to understand what detail would you need to provide to us councillors, please, Mr Keys.
Mr Keys?
Through you, Mr Mayor, one of the essential requirements is to make sure that you have the information necessary to enable you to make a decision. That will require us to provide you a full and detailed documentation and a full analysis of the application against our planning controls, the legislation, and then allow you to make an educated and informed determination from that information.
Thank you, Mr Keys. I have another question from Councillor Conn.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question is those 75 to 100 development applications that are supposedly going to inundate us, what proportion of total development applications does that represent?
Mr Keys?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I'd have to take that on notice off the top of my head. That's the current number of applications up to this point in time. I think that would be close to around about 20%. Of total applications, but again, I'd take that on notice if I can.
Thank you, Mr Keys. Councillor Vanderven, do you have a question?
Yeah, just going back to the answer to my question before through you, Mr Mayor. You said, I think, 49 fall into the first category, so you obviously, that was exclusive of applications for single residential dwellings? Just to confirm.
Keys?
Through you, Mr Mayor, that is applications that are valued at more than 500,000 and does not include single residential dwellings. It includes a variety of commercial. It does include residential where we have multi-dwelling housing, dual occupancies and the like, as well as industrial, commercial and community facilities.
Yes, Councillor Vanderven.
You also did indicate that you also expected some more development applications to come in. So you're not, maybe this is Dorothy Dixon, Mr Mayor, through you, but you're not expecting any drop-off in the number of development applications.
Mr Keys?
At this point in time, it's still considered that applications will come in as and where development is proposed and as it's required.
Thank you. Councillor King, have a question?
Question, Mr Mayor, through you. To relevant member of staff. Council receive very detailed reports on a number of trigger points for DAs, and that's they're controversial or in community interest. There's a number of objectors and a few other trigger points for which you make some fairly detailed reports. If the normal run-of-the-mill DAs that exceed the parameters aren't raising those trigger points, why would you see the need to have a fairly comprehensive report on something that hasn't reached those benchmarks?
Through you, Mr Mayor, the comprehensive reports that are provided to council when they're making a decision are to ensure that council makes an informed decision. We don't expect councillors to be fully briefed and fully cognisant of every single requirement and provision of an LEP, our DCP, all our planning controls, as well as state legislation. So we go through and do a full analysis and provide you with that. In regards to those controversial applications where there may be submissions on one or two issues, they form a small component of the entire report. That is not the whole reason and the sole reason for the comprehensive report being prepared. So to take that a step further, a comprehensive report is still required and the detail is provided around those controversial elements. So there may be additional information required, but there still is a very full and detailed and comprehensive report as a baseload for council's information and to enable you to make an informed decision. One of the potential challenges in any legal system is that council does not make an informed decision, and we have to make sure you have that full amount of information available to you when that decision is made. Otherwise, we leave ourselves exposed.
Councillor King, you want to follow up?
No follow-up.
Thank you. Speaker 4, Councillor Cameron, finally.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Now, to listen to some of the debate tonight in the previous motion and this one, you'd think that we don't make development application decisions. We do. We make very significant ones, and we do it regularly, and we do it constantly, and we do it with the provision of very good and detailed reports from the staff. And almost always we agree, but sometimes we don't with the recommendations, and that is our prerogative, and that's the law, and that's how it should be. Now, the figure of, we have 11 council meetings currently a year. If we have an additional 100, I think that comes out at about, between 75 and 100, it comes out at about 9. I'm not sure actually if that's additional or that's total. Is it additional, I think? So let's call it additional. That's an additional 9 matters to be determined each council meeting, given the size of our agendas and sometimes the very small size of our council meeting agendas. That is eminently doable. And if you can't do it, you shouldn't be on council, in my view. But particularly with the next motion that's coming up, if it's successful, where we have 2 council meetings a month potentially, that will make it even more efficient and even more achievable to go this way. Now, I'm not the most enthusiastic amongst the councillors for this change, but I'm prepared to embrace it, and I'm prepared to review it in 6 months or thereabouts to see how it's operating. We have been doing it this way for a very long time now, and I think it behooves us to try it, to make a change. There is some unhappiness amongst the newer councillors, particularly with the current way of doing things. We are making a provision that will hopefully in the next motion make it very efficient, and people will only have to wait every 2 weeks, which, as I would suggest, is not any impost on the existing arrangements. And I don't believe, apart from a little bit of concern that's being whipped up and misinformation that's being run out in the community, judging by the emails I've received, and I've only received, out of a population of 52,000 people, 4 emails. 4 emails, and they came today. Now that tells me that we should be trying this and seeing if it provides a more transparent and a more efficient way of doing things. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. There being no further speakers for or against or questions, Councillor Con, did you wish to close debate on this?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I will briefly. Look, like Councillor Cameron, I have no fear of being inundated with work to do. I'm happy to do the job that I was elected to do and represent our community on development issues. Given the figures we've been given, the approximations from Mr Keys tonight, 80% of development in the city will still be determined by our very competent staff. And I want to make it absolutely clear that this motion is not a criticism of our staff, and it's not a criticism of any particular development that's taken place in Albury. I've spoken to members of the community who want their elected representatives to have greater oversight and greater transparency of development in this city, and that is the reason I've put this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Con. I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried. Thank you. CM 10.3, notice of motion, council meetings and standing committees. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council, 1, convene a minimum of 2 ordinary council meetings per month and to convene others when required. 2, dissolve the Engineering and Works, Finance and Administration, Community and Cultural and Planning and Environment committees and remove them from the meeting schedule. 3, refer all delegations and reports that would have formerly been referred to the above 4 committees to ordinary council meetings for consideration. 4, amend the Code of Meeting Practice to reflect parts 1, 2 and 3, and 5, be prepared to commence this arrangement subsequent to the ordinary council meeting of May 28th, 2018.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Councillor King.
Second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor King. Councillor Stutchbury, I have a question. Do you want me to take this question before you start debate? Okay. Councillor Con, your question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's not a question. I'd actually like to propose an amendment to this motion, please.
Yes, Councillor Con.
Thank you. My amendment is to add an extra point. I believe our administrative staff have already got a copy. I'd like to add that a period of up to 30 minutes prior to each ordinary council meeting be allocated as a public forum for the purpose of hearing verbal submissions from members of the public on items of business to be considered at the meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Con.
Mr Mayor, that looks correct. I believe my amendment's in bold at the moment.
Yeah, I see it now. Okay, wanting a seconder for that amendment. Thank you, councillors.
Yeah, we did. Councillor King seconded the original motion.
Question, Mr Mayor. That
Councillor
you need a
Vandermeer.
seconder. Councillor Con, I'll be happy to second this. I'm not going to, but I really do think that this one we just need to tease out a few of the issues. I understand what you're trying to do, but I'd like to tease out a few of the issues and maybe look at this a bit later on. Thank you.
I'm happy to second the motion from the chair and allow the amendment to be debated. Thank you, Councillor Con. Did you wish to open debate on it?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I'm proud of steps that this council has already taken this term. We've led the way on webcasting as an example to increase the transparency of our decision making. And we've had designated community forums on particularly controversial issues, but our residents deserve to actually have a say on any item of business. This is common practice in a number of councils across New South Wales, and it's actually a provision that's included in the Office of Local Government's draft model code of meeting practice. On which I hope we can base these provisions. I've had a discussion about this amendment with the General Manager earlier today. The conditions under which members of the public will be invited to speak will need to be put out to the public as a revision of the Code of Meeting Practice, and we will have the opportunity to tease those out, Councillor Vandermeer. What I'm asking tonight is for us to agree in principle that this is something we want to do, and I'm moving it as an amendment to Councillor Stutchbury's motion tonight because I think we're making significant changes to the way that this council does business, and in putting that message out to the community, I think this should be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Con. I will speak against. Councillor Cameron.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. If this were to be done, this is not the place to interpose an amendment on what I think is an unrelated substantive notice of motion. And given the behaviour of some members of the public gallery, who I believe Councillor Con knows only too well last week, and given their behaviour after the council meeting, I'm not inclined to support this in any way, shape or form. However, after an appropriate period of consideration and discussion amongst the councillors and amongst all councillors, if we were to move to this sort of concept, I might entertain it, but not ad hoc, not with no notice, not with no discussion, and not tacked onto the end of someone else's notice of motion.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. Speaker 4, Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, this does appear to have been tacked onto my notice of motion, but I think that it's probably relevant. As Councillor Con has stated, we are looking at a reasonably significant change to the way that we run our council business here. There are many councils across New South Wales where this type of thing happens. Generally speaking, they're called delegations and they're allowed to speak for 5 minutes, and they have to give advance notice. They have to request permission to do it, be given permission to do it, and then they have to give their PowerPoint slides across to council staff to be reviewed before making their presentation. And it just gives members of the public a little greater access to democracy. And if I can just stray into a personal reflection, I own a property in another council location in New South Wales, and I'm a member of a community group. And we frequently use this for our own purposes, generally speaking to our advantage, occasionally not, but that's the lottery that it is. I support this as a something to consider, and I'm happy for it to be added to my notice of motion.
Thank you, Councillor Stutch. We have several questions and 2 speakers against. Councillor King.
Question through you, Mr. The relevant member of staff. In regards to the granting of permission, who grants permission to the speaker?
Mr. Zaknich.
It's normally through the general manager or the delegate. So it'd be in our executive support area.
Sorry, I missed that, Mr. Zaknich. Could I?
Which part, Councillor Vanderbilt?
The last bit, really.
It's through the general manager or delegate through the executive support area.
Councillor King, do you have any further questions?
Yes, just one follow-up. What's the time frame that these applications have to be in? What's the minimum amount of notice we have to be given?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Councillor King. It varies depending on the matters for discussion, but normally we'd want to receive advice by 10 o'clock the day of the meeting. Details around obviously the requirement is that the speakers who wish to address the council would need to address council on matters on the business agenda, so it's not a broader sort of local government issue. It's addressing items on the business agenda of council, and provide any details, presentations, as Councillor Stutcher has indicated, where council can assist them in presenting their case on those particular issues, but a checking mechanism which is warranted, of course, in terms of any items that people may wish to address that aren't on the agenda, which is contrary to the opportunity. They're able to raise those in other forums, for example.
Jump for that, Councillor King.
Look, I've got other questions, but probably more in probably more of a comment that 10 o'clock on the day of the meeting seems a bit short for vetting the subject. And would you envisage that the councillors be made aware that people were going to speak and what was the content of their submission?
Mr. Zaknich.
Thanks for the question through you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly the councils will be advised as part of the process of who's submitting and what it is they'd like to talk on. Again, it's usually a matter related to the agenda. That's a requirement up front. So requests for item or discussion around other items that aren't on the agenda won't be approved. And the time frame, we can certainly request that be longer, but again, they're the sort of detailed items we can look at again. Councillor Con referred to the draft Code of Meeting Practice Guidelines for the Code of from the OLG. They indicate various times and opportunities for council to specify a time. So could be the week before, Councillor King, for example. So that gives us plenty of time to advise councillors of who might be looking to present.
Yes.
Yeah, just one further follow-up. It just seems that there's, in your reply, without being disrespectful, there could be and there may be and other things. Is there a clear set guideline of how this is presented in another council's forum to say that there is? Okay.
Mr. Mayor. There is. Thanks for the question. There certainly is. It's really, though, a matter for the council to determine. I can bring back to you the various examples and a recommended position based on your feedback. But again, this is the first time we've had the opportunity to have the conversation this evening. So,
and further question, Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the most appropriate member of staff. This also raises the question of public exhibition. It was my impression that alterations to the Code of Meeting Practice, unlike the previous question we addressed, need to go to or should go to public consultation. Can you advise, please, Mr. Mayor, through you to the most appropriate member of staff, should the substantive motion have to go to public consultation, and then would the amended motion, if successful, I imagine, would also have to go, or is it either or is it both, or what's the story?
Mr. Zaknich.
Thanks for the question through you, Mr. Mayor. So that the motion that council adopts this evening will need to go to public consultation for a period of 28 days and a response period of 42 days for community members to make submissions to council. And either of those items that have been discussed this evening would need to be included in that code of meeting practice review should council resolve the substantive issue, as you say.
Councillor Cameron, do you have a follow-up?
So in Roman numeral 5.1, Roman numeral 6, sorry, May 20th. Sorry, you're right there, Mr. Mayor. We all didn't have the benefit of your great education, Mr. Mayor. The Roman numeral 6 of the proposed motion, notice of motion, which requires the staff to be prepared to commence this arrangement subsequent to the ordinary council meeting of May 28th. That would in any case be non-achievable, would it not? Or literally, I suppose to look at it literally, you could be prepared to commence, but you won't be able to.
28 days.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, if council endorses this either motion this evening, whichever one it is, it'll need to go out for public comment, 28 days and 42 days response back to council for report and implementation essentially from the 28th of May. So we'd be looking to, so we're now in March, we'd have something back early May in terms of responses ready to roll on whichever component you agree on this evening from the arrangements subsequent to the ordinary council meeting of May the 28th. So the next available meeting there would be the second Monday in in June, which would be the first meeting for this revised code of meeting practice to kick off.
Did you have a follow-up, Councillor Cameron?
So I was right, wasn't I?
Thank you. Councillor Tusby, you have a question?
Yes, through you to the most relevant member of staff, Mr. Mayor. What have the Romans ever done for us? I'll withdraw that question.
Thank you, Councillor Tusby. I have the speaker against Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I speak against whatever motion we have here before us. I think there are two.
The amendment we're debating here.
Yes.
Number 4, 1.5.
Whether it be Roman or otherwise. I wish to speak against both. In essence, I do not support us dissolving any of our committees. In as much as if people don't...
We're debating the amendment.
I think at the moment we're debating the amendment.
Yes, that's correct. But which includes the substantive motion. So it would be value adding to the substantive motion, Councillor Tusby. Continue, Councillor Glacken.
If I might commence again, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll leave the Romans out of it. I wish to speak against whatever version of the motion we have before us now, because I do not support the dissolving of any of our committees, and believe that our committees are an integral part of the way we do business, and I believe they add value to the way we as councillors do our business. We can elect to be members of those committees or not, as we so choose. So for any councillor who does not want to be a member of the committee, they can not be a member of one or more of those committees, if they do not indeed find value in those committees. I have come to committee meetings thinking that I would a certain way on a topic, on a report that comes to that committee meeting, and I have changed my mind about that report in those committee meetings. I have, on occasion, also then changed my mind again before we come to the council meeting to ratify the decisions of each of those committees. And I do that because each of those committee meetings offers us an opportunity to discuss, consider, debate and ask questions. It enables us to ask those questions, to discuss and debate those reports, those topics on more than one occasion, which enables us to make better decisions. And it enables all of us to have greater confidence in the decisions that we make as councillors, whether it be at the committee meetings or indeed redebated at council meetings. And I think it is very important to ensure that we make those good decisions and that we are able to show our community that we have considered the decisions that we are making and that we have reviewed, asked questions, debated those decisions, those reports to make those ultimate decisions. I cannot support at the moment the inclusion of 4, the Roman numeral 4, because I would prefer us to have a greater number of community forums that would enable more people in our community to input into the decisions that we are making on a more regular basis, and that we get that information fed to us or given to us in a greater time period before the reports are written, and we at council discuss, debate and ask questions on those reports, so that the community forums would feed into those reports. The Code of Meeting Practice comes up for review on a regular basis, and I think these items being raised in this motion, or motions, as the case may be, should come as part of that discussion around the Code of Meeting Practice. I don't think we should be making these decisions here tonight. I think it's an ad hoc decision. It's being made on the hoof. I would prefer us to be able to discuss this as a group of councillors based on community feedback before we make these decisions. And so I just cannot support either of these tonight, Mr Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. And I have another question from Councillor Doxey and a speaker 4. Councillor Doxey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Question to the General Manager, please. Looking at line 1, Roman numeral or whatever, does that mean we're going to have 24 council meetings per year? Because that is the way, if this motion is passed, it will mean 24 council meetings each year. Thank you.
Mr Zachnich.
Thanks for the question, Mr Mayor. On the face of it, yes, Councillor Doxey, unless Council resolves, as it has in the past, not to hold meetings in January, for example, or only meetings as required. The provisions under the Local Government Act are, of course, to have a minimum of 10 meetings per year, so we're currently well inside that benchmark. And the only issue we will have, of course, during January is, of course, the additional volume of development applications now proposed to come to Council on a monthly period, or twice a month if this is the case. There'll need to be meetings in January, which is not currently the case. That's potentially a consequence of this motion.
Sounds for that, Councillor Doxey. Councillor Cameron, you have a question?
Actually, I'd like to move an amendment, Mr Mayor, if I may. And my amendment...
Councillor, can we deal with this amendment
I'll foreshadow
first?
an amendment then, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. I'll get back to you on that one. Councillor Thurlow, you have to speak for.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Stutchbury, in proposing this, identified that the committee structure has not been working particularly well. I think the recent report we had showed that the average time of committee meetings was less than 10 minutes for most of the committees, occasionally longer. So I don't believe that they are an essential part of our meeting structure. I believe that all the decisions that are made in those committees could properly be made at a full council meeting, adequate time for debate, and I'm also comfortable with the addition of item 4 on that agenda. As Councillor Con has said, it is practice in other councils. We now webcast and stream. We still have the opportunity to carry community forums. Our Code of Meeting Practice says that the first Monday of every month could be allocated to a community forum. So that possibility remains. I support this motion. I believe we can be more efficient in what we do. to come into 2 council meetings and they are finished at 15 minutes past 6 is pretty crazy. So I believe we can do better, and I think this motion will take us to a better place. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Councillor Vanderman, you've already spoken against the amendment.
No, I haven't. I've asked the question, Mr Mayor.
Oh, that was the question. Okay.
I believe
You
that that's
speak against
correct. Thank you. Mr Mayor, may I make it clear that I am speaking against the amendment and for the original motion?
Thank you.
In the 18 or so months of the existence of this council, we've had a lot of changes to different things. First of all, the amount of notice that we're given around agenda items wasn't sufficient because of the amount of paperwork that we had to deal with prior to our committee meetings. And now we're being asked to vote for something that provides us with an opportunity to hear for up to 30 minutes before a council meeting for people who might be very strongly against or for a particular item coming up before council. I totally disagree with that. I think that if we're going to have public forums, they should be at least a week out from our council meeting so that we have a chance to digest the things that those people say, because we've already asked the council to come up with our agendas and our items on our council meetings a week beforehand because we needed time to read, digest and make some decisions around those issues. So this is not the right way to do what Councillor Con wants to do. We already have the mechanism in place for community forums, and I might just ask the question from, through you, Mr Mayor, to the relevant members of staff, how many community forums have we had in the last 18 months?
Thank you, Councillor Vanderman. Mr Zachnich, are you able to answer that question on the who?
More accurately than that, Mr Mayor. So 6, at least, Councillor Vanderven. Most of them have been around the topical development applications in the city.
Thank you, which we shouldn't be voting.
Thank you. If I can continue, Mr Mayor.
Yes.
So we've had 6 in 18 months, an average of 1 every 3 months, community forums. So from my perspective, we don't need to change that particular part of our code of meeting practice, but I fully support Councillor Suchbury with the intention of the substantive motion. So I strongly urge councillors to reject item 4 and go with the substantive motion for the reasons I've already outlined. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderman. There being no further speakers for or questions, Councillor Con, did you wish to close debate on the amendment? Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I think Mr Zachnich has addressed a lot of concerns around the detail. There's obviously a very involved process of us amending the Code of Meeting Practice, going out for community consultation and then approving the final result. So all the amendments asking tonight is for in principle support for details that can be determined as we later on with the support of the community. There's a lot of other councils that do this. With about 10 minutes of Googling, I came up with Wollongong, Shoalhaven, Campbelltown, Bellingen, Hawkesbury, Waverley, Parkes, Hornsby and Queanbeyan and Pallering. They have a varied amount of notice that residents need to give staff to speak. The longest I found was Bellingen with 24 hours notice. Waverley Council allows residents to speak if they register by 3 p.m. that day. But at the end of the day, I'm confident with whatever our staff believe is appropriate time for them to make the necessary preparations. With regard to the other sorts of community forums we have, they've overwhelmingly been on specific and controversial issues where there are a number of speakers on the same item. There are all sorts of issues where we might have a handful of technical experts in the community who deserve to be heard in this chamber, but who don't constitute enough mass to get a community forum on that issue. Besides the fact that we haven't got our agenda for the meeting out to the public a week in advance, so we can't have a forum about an agenda that hasn't been released yet. So giving residents the opportunity to speak on the day allows them to address the items that we are about to make decisions on. This is about making decisions with our community and not for them, and I urge councillors to support the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Con. Happy to put the amendment as a motion. All those in favour? All those against? The amendment is lost. Now we're dealing with a substantive motion. Councillor Stutchbury, do you wish to open debate on the motion that you've put?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. A lot of this has already been played out in the previous debate, but essentially it's a matter of efficiency and effect. The 4 committees, as they currently stand, meet once a month each, and the meetings are frequently short and sharp. And invariably, when there's a controversial matter that arises from the committee meetings, it gets taken out and redebated at the council meeting, and everything else just goes through. It's inefficient. And I believe that if we replace the committees with a second council meeting per month, we'll be putting in around about the same amount of time and effort without wasting the time debating an item twice. And I think that overall council will be a more efficient body. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. I have a speaker against, Councillor Gluckin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wish to speak against this motion. I did speak against this generally when I spoke against the amendment to this motion as well. Councillor Stutchbury has suggested that this would make council more efficient. In his view, he may perceive it to be more efficient. However, we also need to consider whether or not it would be more effective. I confirm my belief that having more than one opportunity to consider, discuss, debate and ask questions, and then enabling one to go back to those decisions to reaffirm them, or indeed to, for example, with planning, for those to come up again to be reconfirmed by a separate vote in the council meeting is much better, because it enables our community to see that we are considering everything appropriately and that we are not just considering things with a very short-term view. I'm concerned that we will increase the number of rescission motions that we will need, because when things go to one meeting, we are more likely to make a rash decision, not necessarily based on the best information at the time. And Councillor Cameron, I'm very mindful of the fact that there are often things that you raise in the council meeting that we hadn't considered in the committee meetings when you were not present or a member of those committee meetings. And so I do believe that there is the opportunity for all members of our council to participate, whether they are members of the committees or not, in the decisions that we as council make. So no, I cannot support this. And I do believe that should we wish to look at this further, we can do so when we come up with the annual review of the Code of Meeting Practice, which we will do ultimately. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Gluckin. Councillor Cameron, you wish to speak for.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The council committee system is broken, and it's been broken for 6 years now. When I was on council during my first term in 95 and thereon, we had a functional and effective committee system, because what we had then was 3, 4 or 5 people on each committee who would deal with the non-contentious issues, and the contentious issues would be set aside for council determination. And in those days, it was routine and normal for us to adopt the recommendations of each committee, therefore, with a minimum of fuss, and that was the system, and that is how committees are supposed to work. What's happened in the last term of council and in this term of council, the last 6 years, is that some councils insist on being on every committee. Now, if I deliberately do not go on committees, and I'll explain why, although I've explained before, I'll reiterate. If I went on some of these committees, we would have 9 councillors on some of these committees over the last 6 years. There'd be 9 councillors on a committee. That's not a committee. That's ridiculous. The argument that we need to be seen to be thorough by doing things over twice is simply doesn't hold water. You know, with the new planning regime that we have adopted in the previous notice of motion, it now behooves us to have 2 council meetings a year. Because remember this, even though there's been some talk tonight that we're not qualified potentially, or that we shouldn't be doing development applications, we do a bloody lot of them. And we have done a lot of them over the last 6 years, and very major ones, multi-million-dollar ones. And they have to wait, not for the committee meeting, because no action can be taken from the committee meeting. They have to wait to the end of the month when the council meeting goes on. So there's a full month between council meetings. With this new regime and what's being proposed by Councillor Stutchbury, which I fully support tonight, there'll be only a 2-week wait in between decisions being finally made on important development applications. So every 2 weeks, instead of every month, people will have the opportunity to have their development applications dealt with if they need to be determined by council. That is surely more efficient. This is a more efficient way of doing things. The committee system is not functioning as a committee system. It's not triaging the non-important matters. Time and again, we've seen matters pulled out of committee and redebated. When a decision's been made, we've seen matters reversed. Do it at council, do it once and do it properly and do it every 2 weeks. I foreshadow an amendment again, though, that, in fact, I might move it now as a matter of interest. Oh, I think I'll move an amendment. I feel the need.
Another amendment? Yes. What is your amendment?
My amendment is that if we could just scroll up to the Roman numeral 1,
Yep.
that after the month or per month, we insert a bracket and the words excluding January, close brackets, to deal with a very good observation that my good friend and colleague, Councillor Doxey, made.
On that note, would you like me to ask the mover and seconder if they're happy to accept that minor amendment?
Oh, I'd love you to do that,
Cameron.
Mr Mayor.
Councillor Stutchbury, happy to accept that minor amendment?
Well, Mr Mayor, as it happened, I had considered this whilst drafting my notice of motion. As you know, my original notice of motion was far more detailed, and I thought that we ought to have 1 or no meetings in January and only 1 rather than 2 meetings in December, which would make a total of far less than 24 meetings per year. However, I'm very happy. Did I say something wrong then?
No. Keep going.
I'm very happy to accept Councillor Cameron's amendment.
Councillor King, you happy to accept Councillor Cameron's amendment?
Yeah, just want to ask a question in relation to our council meetings procedure. Isn't it that January meeting is just decided that it won't be held, rather than it stipulated in month by month?
I can answer, Mr Mayor.
You can answer, yeah.
And that's Councillor King. Sorry, mate. That's the reason for my amendment, just to make that perfectly clear. Because if you read the motion as it's put now, it's literally, then as Councillor Doxey articulated earlier in his question, we could end up overriding that previous decision.
I'm happy to accept it.
Happy to accept the amendment. Thank you, Councillor King. Councillor Cameron.
Mr Mayor, and I'll just finish up now with my speaking in support of this even better motion. The committee system is not working. We're double handling matters. We're not here to fornicate with inaccurates or do any other colloquialism that you might wish to use to emphasise the situation that's developed. We need to be efficient, and with the new planning arrangements that we've put in place, we have a responsibility on us to deal with those as quickly as possible. Bi-monthly, excluding January, meetings is an excellent way to do that, and I commend the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. I have speakers for Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I do support the rest of this motion, unfortunately, without the extra bit of democracy I was hoping that we could have. I agree with Councillor Cameron that the committee system is currently broken, and unfortunately for Councillor Glacken, I think whether we debated things once or twice was a bit down to the luck of the timing. In some months, we'd have a committee meeting cancelled because the agenda was too small and those items would go straight to full council. And in my experience on council so far, I don't recall Councillor Glacken ever moving for items to be deferred so that we could have a think about them twice. I read my papers carefully, I discuss them with members of the community, and I'm confident with the decisions that I make with just one bite at the cherry at a full council meeting. I support the change and I look forward to coming in twice a month.
Thank you, Councillor Con. Councillor Vandervan, you wish to speak for?
Oh, look, just briefly, Mr Mayor, I think it's been said. The issue for me is that the system's been in place for probably 11 years to my recollection, probably the last couple of years of my first term on council. We actually got to the proper committee stage, and if there's a better, more efficient and more effective way of doing things, I think it behoves us to change that the current system, and I think that this is as good an option as any that's been proposed. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vandervan. Speaker 4, Councillor King.
I just want to support the motion by Councillor Stutchbury. When I came to council 18 months ago, I really couldn't work out the council meeting structure and the committee structure. 18 months down the track, I still don't know why and still can't work it out. So I'm supporting this motion, and it's an indication that councillors are thinking about running a more efficient, more leaner, better way to do things, and hopefully that'll flow through into the council and the community. And secondly, there's been some concerns about councillors making rash decisions on items. I mean, there's no problem with saying to the council meeting, can we put it to the next council meeting and in abeyance and get further information. And again, what Councillor Cameron said, that's only 2 weeks. It's not another month, and then something else mightn't have been ticked off, and then that's another month. So I commend the motion.
Thank you, Councillor King. Being no further speakers for or against, and no questions, Councillor Stutchbury, do you wish to close debate on your motion?
No, thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. We have presentation and deputation, CM11.1, the annual Murray Regional Tourism Update, and we have here tonight, we have the CEO of Murray River Tourism, and I welcome Mark to the diet, brief us on this particular issue. That turned on. Is it on this thing? Is that turned on, Mark?
About half an hour, is that less? 15. Okay, this is going to be a very abbreviated version. Before I do commence, I just want to obviously acknowledge Tracy Squire as well, who is representing Ramrock and on our board, so thank you very much, Tracy. The purpose of tonight was really to give you a run through of focusing on our new destination management plan that we've just launched last Thursday, and certainly distributed a copy of that to yourselves. Just wanted to run through some of the top line elements of that, as well as a couple of other points. So what I will do is be very brief to ensure there's some question time as well. I'm just going to run through a couple of key things. Firstly, obviously, from like yourselves, we have a strong strategic plan and a strong focus moving forward. And the really key elements for us, what our role is to bring the whole region together and to drive three things. One is about growing visitation, growing economic outcomes, and growing employment for the region. So just in a very, very quick snapshot, that's obviously three of our core targets. And we've set some growth targets by 2020 to have 5.7 million visitors to the region and bringing in over $2.2 billion to the economy. Just in terms of how we're tracking at the moment, there's some really pleasing data that we're heading in the right direction and consistently having an increase in visitation. From a domestic day point of view, we've reached now 2.9 million visitors with just under a $400 million economic input into the economy, and overnight visitors of 2.7 million with over $1.1 billion into the economy. So we're seeing some really strong uplift and some really strong value into that economy. So it's very, very significant proportion of the overarching employment, workforce and economic return to the region now. In terms of some of the core other metrics, and I'll just jump forward to the direct and indirect expenditure targets here. From a state point of view, and that's both Victoria and New South Wales, and a national level, the goal is to double visitor expenditure. So that obviously flows down to us at a regional level and then down to a destination level such as yourselves. So some really pleasing numbers over the last 6 years. We've now hit an indirect and direct economic outcome of $2.9 billion, up from $1.4 billion. So we're on the right track. We're actually ahead of the curve from where we thought we would be in terms of delivering on that targeted measure. And importantly, from an employment point of view, and I will stress that we're seeing now the visitor economy as a jobs opportunity for the regional Australia, and also a way of addressing large chunks of youth unemployment in terms of the ability to retain and employ people locally. Those figures of just on 25,000 full-time equivalent staff now being employed across the Mo region are very significant. 1 in 5 jobs now attributable to the visitor economy. Significant uplift of where we were even 3 years ago. It was about 1 in 7 jobs, and before that was about 1 in 8. So over a very short period of time, we're definitely seeing a significant uplift in employment opportunities. And certainly locally, you've seen that, and hopefully when the new mantra comes on board, that'll again inject further employment opportunities back into this part of the world. In terms of a very brief snapshot of the destination management plan, so it's our long-term blueprint. It's certainly there for looking 15, 20 years out, and it's really about encouraging and driving investment into the region. So just as a snapshot, we've done a very detailed review into that plan, looked at where the outcomes are, what we were trying to achieve, and gone about setting that new framework through extensive consultation, both at local government level and also with industry. In terms of a very quick recap around where we were, so the 2012 Destination Management Plan was built around some core themes. Those themes were around the river, nature, food and wine, history, heritage, culture, festivals and events, and accommodation, in particular diversification. So that was the starting point, I suppose, from 2012. I'm going to go straight past this one. From that last destination management plan, some really key metrics that I do want to highlight for you. We've gone back and had a look at what's occurred in terms of investment, direct investment in the visitor economy through development. So this is working with your internal teams and right across all 13 local governments to have a look at the investment that's gone through planning, the planning process, as well as state government investment. So over that 5-year period, over $370 million in direct expenditure into tourism infrastructure across the region. It then fed on to over 600,000 new visitors during that period, and then an additional $339 million in visitor expenditure. So a huge uplift, over $700 million in direct expenditure through the visitor economy in the last 5 years, aligned back to the destination management plan and the creation of over 4,500 direct and indirect jobs. So again, by having this long-term plan, it certainly is delivering for the region, and we're certainly seeing strong uplift. And that's certainly not just something MRT is doing, it's the collaboration that exists across both state governments and the 13 local governments across the region. Having a structured blueprint to move forward on is actually starting to really yield us the strong results. In terms of the next destination management plan, there was a number of elements that needed to be looked at. I won't go through all these individually, but certainly the focus around the river was really core, and the need to continue to drive that. We've moved forward in many elements, but we need to continue that. In terms of the nature-based asset, what was clear from the first destination management plan was that we said we wanted investment by Parks Agency in parks. And whilst there has been some investment in that area, what became clear in doing the review is by not being specific enough, so we actually need investment in this particular park and this particular way, we actually haven't necessarily ticked all the boxes. So certainly moving forward, that's a definite focus. And certainly from a food and wine perspective, it's a hygiene factor. We're now looking at all the distilleries, the microbreweries, and all the agritourism elements. We're extending that out to a much broader definition. There's certainly been a shift in the visitors as well over that last 5-year period, both in this region but also more broadly. And there's a huge opportunity for international as we move forward, tempering that enthusiasm with it's about 2% of our total visitation currently. And so whilst there's opportunities to continue to build that, it's certainly not the silver bullet that perhaps some people are saying. There's also the need for continuing investment in infrastructure, and that's particularly around roads, access, scheduling, simple things like scheduling of public transport to actually enable the movement of people across the region when businesses are open, when they've got an opportunity to actually spend money in region. The DMP framework, as I touched on from the previous, it's built on those same themes with the addition of a new one. We've actually tweaked golf, which was one of the pillars, to now become sport and recreation, and that's a huge opportunity, and particularly in this this eastern end of the river. Food, drink, and agribusiness has certainly been extended out, and definitely infrastructure, transport, and servicing has been added. Again, we've rated all of those areas across a tier 1, 2, and 3, as well as destinational opportunities. And the tier 1 is basically a game changer that has the ability to drive visitation to the whole of the region. Tier 2 and 3 certainly have the ability to do that, but it's either at a regional level or at a sub-destinational level. In terms of the projects that I just want to quickly highlight for you before I go into some of your particular ones, under the river theme, there's two that I want to just highlight. There is river cruising, and it's certainly one that's come through really strongly. One of the fastest growing sectors in the world, one of the best rivers in the world we have. River cruising is not well structured from end to end. There's certainly pockets of it that enable it to occur. So we'll actually do some significant work around looking at investment opportunities in that river cruising space. And then the Murray River Road is the other key one around the river that creates the backbone of a touring route. So in simple essence, it's our version of Route 66, if you like. So creating a backbone from the end or the start of the river all the way through to the end, and all the product experiences can be clustered around that. There's obviously a lot of other projects that have been identified that we won't have time to go through this evening, but I actively encourage you to have a look through the destination management plan. In terms of nature-based tourism, there was a couple of elements in particular. So Murray River Adventure Trail is the whole of Murray trail experience that we've identified previously, and has really come strongly through the consultation, the need and the opportunity to move that forward, to create a walking, cycling and by river experience from one end of the river to the other. And then some of the other projects were really defined in terms of making sure we hit that target of advancing some of those key projects rather than keeping it as a generic high-level investment. The key element in this area from an aligned project point of view is the need to develop tour operators. We need to make sure that they're sustainable across the region, and we need to think about how we actually enable tour operators to work in a regional sense right across the region, from end to end, as opposed to just in a specific destination, to see if we can get some sustainability in those businesses. In terms of sport and recreation, again, there was 4 key projects identified, 2 of which are motorsport, which is quite interesting when you look through that process. And obviously one in particular for you that I'm sure is very top of mind around the sports infrastructure investment that's required. In the aligned area, one, again, point just to highlight is around capacity. So if we're going to host state, regional, national, international events, do we have the capacity in our communities to actually deliver those events, to make it seamless for the event organisers? You're in a very fortunate position up this eastern end that you do have considerable capacity, but there's still more to be done in terms of building the breadth of across a range of other sporting opportunities. Under food, drink and agribusiness, again, a couple of key projects. The one that I will just focus on briefly is the Murray Agri and Culinary Tourism Development Strategy. We'll be developing, and it's commencing very soon, developing a holistic agri-tourism culinary strategy for the Murray, and then 5 sub-region cluster plans. So this eastern end will have your own cluster plan with detailed implementation that hopefully will trigger further opportunities for investment and development. We're also doing a number of pilot projects as part of that, where we'll be looking at distribution pilots. There'll be another one working with actual producers on farm, looking at opportunities for investment in the tourism or development of tourism opportunities. And it may be something that we will come back to you from a planning point of view, looking at opportunities. So some of the initial concepts being looked at are things that could be as simple as the ability to camp on farm for a night or 2 nights and actually experience a farm in that essence. Some elements of that you're not technically allowed to do currently. The other is around more and more access to farm gate providore type experiences, where often it can be quite challenging from a planning perspective. In terms of arts, heritage and culture, what became very strong was not just the investment in arts spaces, such as what you've obviously clearly done. One of the key highlights is Mama, that was identified back in the 2012 DMP, has actually come to fruition, which is fantastic. Doesn't mean we need more of those. It's actually looking at opportunities to drive arts, cultural experiences right across the region. And from an enabling perspective, there's a really strong need to look at digital technology and repurposing of existing buildings and spaces to actually bring in more of that cultural performance-based opportunity. And I can certainly see opportunities where we would have co-investment to secure an event or an exhibit that may transition from one end of the river to the other, rather than it just being borne by one particular location. Festivals, events, and certainly a key project that was identified was the redevelopment of your entertainment conference facilities and the strong opportunity to move that forward and get that business events market growing even further. I think I've just died. Oh, there we go. Accommodation, there was a couple of particular projects. Again, up this end of the river, you've had significant investment over the last 5 years, certainly multiple quests, Chura redevelopment, as well as other refurbs and the new mantra. But there's still a need for some diversification, and I know there's an opportunity that can be considered as part of that eco facility, cabin facility, etc., as we move forward. And then finally, the infrastructure transport servicing. It was really for this location, obviously, was the airport, continued investment in that, in your airport, but also in the rail side of things, just to look at timetabling and continue investment in that side of the area. The last 2 points, because I know I'm going to run out of time, Mr. Mayor, is looking at just a quick summary of your key projects. So there's a number of Tier 1 projects that have been identified for the Eastern Murray, and a number of these have been then elevated up into the top 12 projects across the whole of the region. And so obviously you've got a whole suite of those there that they'd be all very familiar, I would hope, to the councillors, because they're all coming through your plans and embedded up into our plan and then go through to the state plan. And then in terms of Tier 2 and Tier 3, again, I don't think there would be too many surprises in there from your perspective in terms of some of the projects that have been slowly burning for a little while in this location and now have been picked up and put into the overall development opportunity. So again, it just helps you to elevate this back up to state level. So when you're looking at projects and looking at funding or wanting advocacy in areas, we can actually utilise this document as a key strategic tool for you. Just in terms of the, if I can move forward. Just a couple of projects that I will touch on in terms of the Murray. So looking at the whole region, obviously I've sort of mentioned briefly the Adventure Trail, Murray River Road, the Ag Experience and River Cruising. So they're enabling projects that will actually invest and work at a holistic perspective. The rail passenger service is really one of advocacy for us. So it's working with you to actually advocate for increased investment and or servicing. We will definitely be looking at contemporary visitor information servicing. So this is not about bricks and mortar only. It's not a visitor centre specific. It's about how do we talk to and address visitors, whether they're thinking about coming, whether they are coming, whether they're in region or whether they've gone home, as well as integration of the digital into that space. And also looking at Aboriginal Indigenous tourism capacity building, because it's a core element opportunity, but we can't actually go straight to the product level. We actually need to build capacity over a period of time to make it sustainable. I'm going to go straight through a heap of these. Just quickly touching on our advocacy footprint. So apart from the DMP process, which is a core strategic direction, we obviously have an ongoing relationship around advocacy. So river management is very much at the centre of that. Communication infrastructure is an critical importance in terms of removing black spots, but also building capacity. Any visitors, whether they're domestic or international, if they don't know where they're going, if they don't feel comfortable, they can't communicate and share stories, then they're not actually having the full visitor experience that we need them to have. So it's one that we'll continue to work on, and we'll continue to work with you on enabling infrastructure opportunities as well. In terms of just a quick snapshot around our industry capacity element, I just did a quick review over the last financial year. We ran over 17 workshops and trained nearly 300 operators from right across the Murray. This year so far, we've delivered 5 workshops to over 141 operators with another 7 to go. So pretty comfortable in terms of our target. We have a target of 250 a year. I try and stretch that to 300 if we can get as operators in that level and continually being upskilled. The other point I'll just touch on is the Tourism Awards, which was just released, launched last week. So there'll be a regional tourism awards that focuses on the same criteria as state awards, and we run a mentoring program for first-time entrants. So if you are aware of any businesses in your area that you would actively encourage to go through that process, we fully fund that program and work with them one-on-one and take them through that process and hopefully get them onto state and national awards. And the last point is really just around marketing. The role of marketing has changed so much. We'll continue to work on content development because that is a critical focus, and we always need fresh, up-to-date, relevant content. We'll work with conversion partners, and as we have done recently, and we still retain a strong public relations program to make sure we're putting the focus back on the river, the region, and work through seasonal and international partnerships. And there you go, Mr. Mayor. I've whipped through that as quick as I possibly can.
Well done, Mark.
Happy
Excellent job. And councillors, that presentation will be available to you all after this meeting. So, Councillor Glacken, you have a question?
Yes, a couple if I may. First 3, actually. The first one to the most relevant member of staff. Can I ask how long did we actually schedule for that presentation? Because I'm conscious of the fact that Mark had a lot more information whilst it will be available to us.
Mr. Sacknage.
It was up to half an hour, but we did negotiate that at the beginning of the presentation.
The next 2 questions are about the presentation. Slide 1 had some figures on there, and I think they were 2 different tables, so I wanted to ask a bit more information on those if we could get them up. And while you're trying to find that, unless the staff can get that up really quickly.
Quicker for you to go, that's all right. This is just...
The second question is about a reference you made about halfway through the presentation, or probably...
So that's, if you go, so the next table, I think it'll be. That's the one you were...
no, next one, sorry.
Next one down.
Yep,
so
that one.
The top table is just a tracking report that we look at. So 10 years before the collaborative project was set up, so when all the local governments were working individually, the 2 states were working individually, we had a 10-year decline year on year of visitation. Since the Murray Regional Tourism was set up as a collaborative to work across the region, the second of the figures has shown significant growth. So just a cross reference.
Can I clarify, please? What are you measuring? I believe you're measuring people in the first one and dollars in the second one.
Correct, yes. So that's exactly right. So there was a change during that period, and then the one, if you go back one slide, with the current 2017 figures shows you the same measurement of people and visitation.
Okay, so I shouldn't really be comparing those 2.
No, they're just 2 different metrics that we utilise on the one slide.
Okay. My second question is, you made reference, probably 40% of the way through the presentation, you made reference to some sort of application for motorsport here in Albury-Wodonga. I'm not sure if maybe I should be asking the staff if they could...
So the reference to motorsport was for 2 of the projects identified under the sport and recreation area, which is Chisholm Reserve, which is in Swan Hill, and Mildura Motorsports Complex. So they're 2 motoring projects that fit within the sport and rec area. Motoring wasn't identified specifically.
So not in Albury-Wodonga?
Not through the consultation here, no.
Okay, thank you very much. Happy with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman, question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Thanks for your presentation, Mark. Just want to get some a reassurance, I suppose, that a couple of years ago there was a bit of a hiatus in the tourism industry as far as the New South Wales government's plans were concerned about regions. Has that settled down? Have we got everybody working on the same page now?
Certainly, we've got funding signed off by New South Wales till 2019, which aligns to the Victorian government. And then the recent VIAP review, so the Minister called for review before Christmas to actually look further about regional tourism and all tourism in New South Wales. So that review is due to go to Cabinet, as I understand, in May. So we'll see what comes out of that. But we're on the right pathway, certainly.
Thank you.
Councillor King.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mark, can you go to the slide that's got I think, initiatives with the circles around it?
Yes, sure. So these were ones that were identified specifically for Albury.
Tier 2. After.
Next one.
Next one. Tier 2, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've got the Lake Hume houseboats and the RV park.
Yes.
Albury Wodonga RV strategy. So where did you get that enthusiasm to put that there? Because we're not feeling it at this end.
So that came through the consultation. So we ran consultation here between the three local governments, and we had local government representatives. So that's Wodonga, Greater Hume and yourself. And then we ran the same session in the afternoon with industry. And those themes and projects were born out of all of that consultation. So it also was a review of any strategic documentation that you have locally. And certainly from a Lake Hume houseboats, for instance, I see that fitting fairly and squarely under the river cruising strategy opportunity to have a look at how, why, what those opportunities look like. That's my personal opinion on that particular one. In terms of the caravan camping, as I mentioned, there's been a lot of investment, significant investment in apartment, hotel redevelopment here, but there's still a gap in either a glamping, camping, some sort of element. When I look across the region, I have 196 caravan parks across the Murray, and I have only sort of a couple, 3 up this end of the area. So just looking at the opportunities in that space.
Just to further follow up, if I can, so could you expand on the RV and caravan park? So the 196 on the Murray.
Correct.
Where's the 3 up this end?
So we've got, if I look at Albury Wodonga, so for me it's there's the 2 in Wodonga, and there's the Lake Hume Resort obviously as the 3rd. So there's scope to do something, and it doesn't have to be huge scale, but there's certainly scope to create elements. And I know it's been embedded in the moment in 2 master plans that have been looked at, or particularly one on the Gateway Island opportunity, to having a look at that master plan. I know we fed the DMP has gone into that consultation process.
Just to further follow up, what's the amount of caravan RV parks that are actually on river foreshore, riverbank?
Off the top of my head, I couldn't give you the numbers. I know it'd be a very high percentage would be located on water, so whether that be lake or river. But I just don't have the exact numbers at hand. But I know we do have some data around that, which I'd happily look up for you and get back to you on. Yep.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Mark, just looking at the map of your sphere of influence, I'm just wondering why Snowy Valleys and Towong aren't included, given the Murray River goes all the way to its source, and given that they also have a huge level of tourism and available. The River Road, for instance, is a scenic trip. Are they not, or have not, ever been part of your board or your organisation?
No, so it's an interesting one. So on the Victorian side, when they first set up the 10 boards in Victoria, Towong actually aligns with Northeast or Tourism Northeast. So that is their alignment, and that's the way they work. And Snowy's obviously has always been separate into New South Wales through Destination Riverina Murray now, on New South Wales side that does pick up the Snowies. But for something like project work, so if I look at Murray River Road, for instance, that will engage with 3 states. We only currently engage with 2, and it'll engage with another, I think it's about another 9 local governments that you start to pick up as part of that potential project. So whilst we have a sphere of influence or a partnership with our current 13 local governments in the 2 states, for particular projects that can be expanded upon, and that's certainly where we see that with Murray River Road.
So in terms of your mapping, the Lake Hume Dam, who does that come under? Does that come under a multitude of tourism authorities?
Well, no, that actually sits within our framework. So predominantly Wodonga, yourself and Greater Hume front that. Certainly from a Towong perspective, I know I've spoken to state government about some opportunities they've been looking at just to make sure there's some alignment that's not disaligned, but we don't technically partner with them on an ongoing basis.
No worries. Thank you. And thank you for And I believe the questions are done.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, councillors, back to the main game. CM12, the reports, minutes of committees and working parties, there are none. CM13, documents for sealing thanks, councillors. Councillor Cameron?
I understand it's practice now that we have to read the
It's up on the screen.
the form, which I can't see. The council authorises its seal to be affixed to the documents outlined below in the presence of two signatories authorised to affix the seal pursuant to Regulation 400 of the Local Government (brackets General close brackets Regulation 2005) and the use of the council seal policy, A. AlburyCity lease to National Rugby League Limited, Administration Office, 3rd floor, 533 Keyworth Street, 2-year renewal commencing 7th March 2018, FIL 09//01803, and B. Albury lease to Advocacy Proprietary Limited, Administration Offices, 3rd floor, 533 Keyworth Street, 1-year optional renewal commencing 15th March 2018, FIL 17//00503.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. Councillor Vanderbilt.
Happy to second that long motion, Mr. Mayor. Sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Cameron, do you wish to speak to that at all?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Being no question or debate, happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Officers' reports for consideration. CM 14.1, request for assistance with asbestos declared home. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move the recommendation that Council agree to waive council fees applicable to development applications and construction certificates under the Looseville Asbestos Voluntary Purchase and Demolition Program, where approval is sought for a replacement dwelling in the Albury local government area.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Councillor Cameron.
I'd like to second that motion, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, just open debate.
Look, I think it's pretty straightforward. The intent was that people who had the problem of asbestos in their home and it had to be demolished and or removed would be punished under the original guidelines in that they had to build on the same property. This removes that anomaly, and provided the replacement dwelling is in the Albury local government area, the fees will be waived.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Councillor Glackton, do you wish to speak for?
Simply to support the recommendation, in so much as we are not dealing with one application with this resolution, we're dealing with any future possible applications that may arise. So it's really a policy decision based on a set of circumstances currently, but that would apply across the board. So that being the case, I do support this.
Thank you, Councillor Glackton. There being no further speakers for or against, Councillor Thurley, just to close debate.
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. CM 14.2, Albury Entertainment Centre, Convention Centre expansion options. Councillor Cameron.
I'd like to move that that Council endorse 2B and 3B as the preferred design options, and Roman numeral 1. Obtain independent structural engineering advice on 2B and make any adjustments to the design as a result, which may include removing the first floor connection to the theatre, Roman numeral 2. Obtain independent quantity surveyor estimates of 2B and 3B and to confirm costs, Roman numeral 3. Update the previous preliminary feasibility study, financial and economic analysis, to reflect revised construction costs and venue capacity identified in both options to test which has the potential to deliver the best return from investment, and Roman numeral 4, present a further report to Council detailing the outcome of further investigations. B, include a $5 million capital allocation in the 4-year delivery program to enable project progression and support any grant funding applications in the event of the cost-benefit analysis, if the cost-benefit analysis is positive.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken.
I'm very happy to support Councillor Cameron's recommendation as a motion.
Thank you. Councillor Cameron, did you wish to speak to that?
Yes, I do, and I want to say thank you, Mr. Mayor. We can't just let in my view, we can't let the entertainment centre sit as it is. You know, all our buildings need renewal and maintenance over the years, but it is too soon to determine what ultimately Decision Council and perhaps future councils will make as to the ultimate design and the ultimate work that's performed there. I think this motion is a sensible, staged step forward to look at a couple of options and determine which is the best and make possible the investigation as to particularly the cost benefit and the potential for those options to be considered by future council meetings. Any support in the future that I will give to these projects, however, will be contingent on tripartite state federal funding. We've been done over, AlburyCity and its people, we've been done over in a couple of projects, notably Mumma and the Lavington expansion by the state government, which is bludgeoning, absolutely bludgeoning on the people of Albury. And I won't be supporting any of this work in the future going forward until I see real commitment from both the other two tiers of government. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. There being no further debate or questions. Councillor Cameron, did you wish to close debate?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM 14.3, the 2018 National General Assembly of Local Government call for motions. Thank you, councillors. Thank you. Waiting. Councillor Stutchbury.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, with great pleasure, I'd like to move that Council A approve the Mayor or delegate attendance at the 2018 National General Assembly of Local Government and the Regional Development Forum in Canberra from Sunday 17th to Wednesday 20th of June 2018, and B, determine any motions relating to the NGA themes as outlined in the report.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervan.
I'm happy to second the motion. I do have some questions, if I could.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, did you wish to open debate?
No, I'd like to hear the questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervan, do you have a question?
Yeah, specifically around previous motions that we've, this particular council has put forward to this conference, and has there been any outcome for those particular motions? Because I have this feeling that whilst I honestly believe that the Mayor should be attending this particular General Assembly for networking and other purposes, including meeting members of the government in specific portfolios and also opposition potential, if you like, potential alternative government members. I just have a real concern about the fact that not a lot happens with motions that get put up by member council.
Mr. Zachnich.
Thanks for the question. Through you, Mr. Mayor. So, Councillor Vandervan, the report includes some attachments of outcomes or responses on the last two conferences that we've attended. Each, wherein council submitted at least one motion at each conference that's either been acted on by the executive of ALGA or referred to the responsible minister, and we've yet to receive a response from the relevant minister at this stage on the. There was one around the cross-border strategic infrastructure and transport planning, and the earlier item was around energy costs, spiralling energy costs, and the request that the government take some affirmative action around trying to influence the market and the providers around that issue. So they're the two most recent ones, of which we're yet to be advised of a formal outcome.
Can I follow up, Mr. Mayor? So that begs the question, is there any point to these motions? Because it appears that whilst they have been put forward and perhaps acted on by ALGA. The response doesn't seem to be forthcoming from the government, and one just wonders whether this is just an absolute gabfest, nothing else, with no results for our communities, because these motions are put up in all seriousness to try and have an impact. And I just one of the motions that we need to put up to the conference is, when are you going to actually do something about the motions that have been put up previously? And that's a very, I don't make that suggestion in any jest, Mr. Mayor. I think it's quite sad that it takes so long to get responses from ministers who have the same issue with state government, as we well know. I'd be more than happy to move a motion that we ask the local government, or the Australian Local Government Association, when are they going to actually do something about the motions that get put up, and when are the ministers and the government going to do something about the motions that we put up? Nothing else to change.
Question, Mr. Zacknich, do you have an answer to that?
I'm sure the Chair would accept a valid motion from you, Councillor Vanderven, if that was your wish, and you got a seconder. Normal process.
Did you have a motion you wish to consider for this?
When do these need to be in, Mr. Mayor, if I could ask?
Before the end of the week.
Before the end of the week.
And do we need a seconder for that motion, do we?
In terms of your suggestion about whether they're ever going to act on the motions that were put into them, I think that's the...
I'm happy to put one off the cuff now, Mr. Mayor, if you're happy to accept the motion. Yeah. I mean, do we need to deal with the substantive motion we've got now, and as a result of that, at the end of that, move a motion? Because that might give me 30 seconds or so to actually come up with a half-worded motion.
Yes, I can deal with the substantive motion if you can consider what your amendment may be.
Not amendment, it'll be a separate motion.
Separate motion, you're foreshadowed. Okay, Councillor Conn, do you have a question?
I do. It's actually to the mover and seconder. Given that the report doesn't have any motions in it, is Part B necessary?
You have a Part C, yes?
Yes, yes, it is relevant if it gives council the opportunity to determine any motions it wishes at this meeting, or the subsequent collation and circulation by agreement, which is what we've said in the report.
Councillor Conn, you good? Okay. Councillor Stutchbury, did you wish to speak to your motion, or you've heard the questions?
No, I think it's all pretty straightforward. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. There being no further question or debate, I'm happy to put the substantive motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Councillor Vanderven.
Oh, look, I'd like to move that AlburyCity Council requests that the Australian Local Government Association put a timeline on ministers' responses to motions raised at the conference.
Okay, we're just waiting for that to be collated. Whilst we're doing that, Councillor Thurley, do you have a question?
Through you to probably the General Manager, is that a motion that can even be put, that we are requesting ALGA to put a timeline on ministers' responses?
Mr Zacknich.
Yes, it can be. I'd imagine that the executive would deal with it, wouldn't necessarily go to the conference itself. So the intent is to get ALGA to do something about it. Yeah.
I need to wait for it. Comfortable with that motion, Councillor Vanderman?
That's right. Put a time on the minister's right.
Councillor Cameron? You wish to second that?
I'd love to second that, Mr Mayor, because I reckon it's good.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman, I have a question before you speak to this motion. Councillor Glacken.
Yes, can I ask the mover and the seconder, can they consider the wording of appropriate or put a timeline on ministers' responses? Will that be interpreted by ALGA with the intent of the councillors moving and seconding, in so much as a timeline could mean that they report back on how long it took the minister to respond to the motion. So perhaps a little clarity. Can I ask the councillors to consider a little clarity around the wording they're using?
Councillor Vanderman, comfortable?
I'm just thinking on the run here. I appreciate Councillor Glacken's point.
Well, Councillor.
Put a response period. I don't know. Maybe the general manager could provide some enlightening words here.
I think Councillor Cameron might have some. He's always got some. Councillor Cameron?
Well, I have a question which might allow Councillor Vanderven and his bosom to debate a while, like Henry V. I would like to know, through you, to the most appropriate member of staff, if the deadline is this week for motions, why is this report only coming to us now for consideration?
Mr Zagnich.
Because it's a early deadline. The business paper was issued at the beginning of March. We're now at the March council meeting, which is the most appropriate council meeting to place it to.
But surely you council officers would have been aware that the conference was coming up and this would be the process.
Yes, we were aware at early March. That's correct.
All right, that might give me enough time to think.
Thank you, Mr. Any suggestions in relation to the motion, Councillor?
I've got some. I could make suggestions all night, and this is the danger of this predicament we're in now, that we could all sit here now for the rest of the week, you know, thinking up motions that we might like to go to
No, we're talking about amending the existing motion. Are you happy with put a response period?
Look, I'll be guided by the mover. I'm happy with the text of it now, but, you know, like I'll support Councillor Vanderven. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Response time period on ministers' responses to motions,
Right.
Put a response time period. Just add the word time in
there.
Yep. That might cover Councillor Bradford's concerns.
Councillor Glecken, how are you feeling about that one now?
I'm not sure that's...
Response to responses.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's appropriate. However, it is the motion of Councillor Vanderven and Councillor Cameron, and perhaps an appropriate motion can be taken from this.
Thank you, Councillor Glecken. Mr Zagnich has a couple of suggestions on what word we should use. I think that's... Did you wish to call a point of order on that one, Councillor? You are. You're a bit concerned his wordsmithing is better than yours.
Well, you know, I will say, Mr. Mayor, that it is irregular and not to be encouraged for people other than councillors to be throwing in motions at a council meeting. I will say that.
But he was... Yes, he can.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Mayor. What I'm suggesting is a couple of well-chosen words that may assist the motion before us. Can I just remind councillors that the normal process is that the General Manager would go away based around themes that councillors may raise at this meeting for submission to the conference, draft those motions for you, and then they're agreed on by circulation, which has been the past practice, where we do have enough time, not on this occasion, but where we do have enough time to for you to debate those. So essentially what we're doing is, because of the shortened time frame, trying to assist you in this process this evening. Here's a suggested changes if Councillor Vanderven may wish to consider those.
Councillor Vanderven, we have to consider that this particular motion, as it sits, be put as it is.
It's not a. I'm happy with it because I'm trying to put a theme rather than a specific words around it. So I'm happy for this to go forward as long as council understand what we're trying to do.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderbilt, and the General Manager will then circulate any minor changes to the wording. Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, thank you.
So, Councillor Vanderbilt, did you wish to speak to that?
Look, it's fairly obvious. It's disappointing that we go to all the trouble of raising motions of concern and interest to other local governments, including ourselves, and that we just don't get a response in any reasonable period of time. It almost begs the question, why do we bother? So I think that if we can get some finite times where we can get some responses from ministers, and even if they say we're not going to respond, it'd be better than what we currently get, because we don't get anything at the moment. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderbilt. Councillor Cameron, it was remiss of me. Are you satisfied with that response from the General Manager?
I sometimes wonder if I'll ever be satisfied, Mr Mayor, but I'm happy with that wording. Thank you.
Thank you. There being no further question or debate, I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Officers' reports for noting CM 15.1, the Lavington Sports Ground redevelopment update. Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move that council receive and note the contents of this report.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderbilt.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Cameron, to open debate.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This report, as you may remember, is the result of a notice of motion which was successfully voted on that I put to council some time ago. It is necessarily a fact, or it is a fact, that it is necessary for us to deal with some elements of this subject in confidential. That's simply the law and regulation around these matters. There are some aspects of this that will need to be dealt in that fashion, but I hope at least that this report helps elucidate the people of Albury and the Fourth Estate and their representative as to what has occurred here and perhaps why, insofar that we can discuss it in open council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. There appears to be no speakers for or against. Did you wish to close debate?
No.
Thank you. I'm happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM 16, delegates' reports for noting. 16.1, New South Wales Water Reform Report. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the council receive and note the report.
Thank you. Councillor Gluckin.
Happy to second.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, wish to speak to that?
I really don't want to say too much, except to acknowledge finally the New South Wales Government has taken on board the recommendations of the Matthews report, understands that there are serious issues with water in the Northern Basin, understand that that behaviour has undermined the Murray-Darling Basin Plan to a significant extent. But if they follow through with the 4 measures that they are suggesting, I believe that significant improvement will occur, and we may see some quite significant developments in the next 6 months with regard to regulation, transparency and other matters.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. I have a question. Councillor Vanderbilt.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. If I can put a question through you to Councillor Thurley.
Yes.
As a result of my attendance last week at the Community Advisory Group for Murray Lower Darling, one of the issues raised with telemetry capable meters was the fact that they might be telemetry capable, but there's no internet that they can access. Was that any part of the discussion over as part of item 1, and was there any moves to put pressure on other levels of government to provide that internet capability?
Councillor Thurley.
No, not directly. Basically, these are suggestions so the water take measurement and metering. This is requiring people to make submissions as to whether every pump should be metered or simply those that are in high-risk areas or high volume. We don't really want to be monitoring someone with a small pump delivering a small amount of water. So they haven't settled on the final requirements, but they want, wherever possible, they must have data logging. They may not always be able to have telemetry, but they must be able to log the data.
Okay. Comfortable, Councillor Madden? Yep. So I'm happy to put that report. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Okay, notice of urgent business. We have none. We have the confidential matters, CM 18.1 and 18.2. I need someone to move us into confidential. Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council move into confidential to discuss items CM 18.1, Lavington Sports Ground unsuitable soil update, and CM 18.2, Strategic Land Acquisition Part Lot 27 DP 1014850, as either confidential items exclusive of press and public for the grounds that the matters relate to advice can... No, is it G or A? Anyway.
It looks like G.
It is G. Advice concerning litigation or advice that would otherwise be privileged from production in legal proceedings on the grounds of legal professional privilege. And D, commercial information of a confidential nature that would, if disclosed, 1, prejudice the commercial position of the person who supplied it, or 2, confer a commercial advantage on a competitor of the council. Local Government Act 1993, number 30, section 10A 2G D I 12. The chairperson... Oh,
yeah. Thank you.
I can stop there.
Councillor Clacken.
Happy to second that.
Thank you. I must advise that if there are any statements or submissions from the public regarding the reason identified for the confidential item CM 18.1 and CM 18.2, there appears to be none. There were no submissions received. So I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Yep. We're back online. Thank you. We're just resuming open council at 8:52 p.m. The motion was put that we resume open council. During the closed session and confidential session of council, council moved the following two motions. 18.1, Lavington Sports Ground unsuitable soil update, that Council A receive and note the contents of this report, and B receive a further report on this matter once the advice from Culmore is finalised. Moved by Councillor Cameron, second by Councillor Doxey, and the motion was carried. 18.2, Strategic Land Acquisition, Part Lot 27DP 1014850. Moved by Councillor Glacken, seconded by Councillor Cameron, that Council A purchase the land described as Part Lot 27DP 1014850, being Part 795 Centre Road, Hamilton Valley. B, pursuant to Regulation 400 of the Local Government Act, General Regulation 2005, and the use of the Council seal policy, authorise the Mayor and General Manager to sign and fix the Council seal of land transfer documents and any other documents deemed necessary to complete the purchase and settlement of Part Lot 27DP 1014850 and release the positive covenant. And C, upon transfer to the Council, the land described as Part Lot 27DP 1014850 be classified as operational land in accordance with the provisions of Chapter 6, Part 2 of the Local Government Act 1993. The motion was carried. Council was again resumed at 8:52. Thank you, councillors. And that completes our business of council tonight, and council is closed at 8:55. Thank you. Oh, yeah.